Good morning. My name is Evan Yunker. For those of you who don't know me, it has been a while. And for those of you who don't know me, I moved to Georgia about 4 or 5 years ago, and it is really good to be back. And I want to thank Reverend Leslie for the opportunity to share a message with you this morning. And I want to thank you all for having me. As some of you may know, I'm leaving the country at the end of the month, and this has always been my spiritual home, at least for the last 12 or 13, somewhere in there years. And it's really an honor to be with you, probably doing my last sermon before I leave, so thank you for having me. Some 200 some odd years ago, a group of 56 men, 41 of them slave owners, sat down in Independence Hall and signed a document that said in part, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." It goes on to list 27 grievances and then declares, "These united colonies are, and of right, ought to be free and independent states." And that is the impetus behind our celebration of the American Independence Day. It is worth noting that while this document was being signed on the first floor, fugitive slave violations were being processed on the second floor that day. That duality of the American concept of independence has been around in our country since its inception. For people of color, women, Native peoples, the LGBTQIA+ community, and others, Independence Day is filled with hypocrisies and complications. Certainly, when the Founding Fathers visualized the celebrations of that day, they did not fathom their slaves or their descendants joining in. Frederick Douglass pointed this out memorably in 1852. "What, to the American slave, is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him more than all other days the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham, your boasted liberty an unholy license, your national greatness swelling vanity. Your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless, your denunciation of tyrants brass-fronted impudence. Your shouts of liberty and equality, hollow mockery, your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgivings, with all your religious parade and solemnity, are to him mere bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy. A thin veil to cover up crimes which would disgrace a nation of savages. There is not a nation on the earth guilty of the practices more shocking and bloody than are the people of the United States at this very hour." He certainly did not mince words. But here's the thing. Frederick Douglass also realized the difference between the practices of this country and its ideals. A little over 12 years later, he said bluntly, "Abolish slavery tomorrow, and not a sentence or syllable in your Constitution need be altered." The ideals were there. The chasm between our ideals as a nation and our practices has been with us since this time. Sometimes we celebrate when we live into our highest collective self, and sometimes we mourn as our dominant culture tramples the rights of others. For many Americans, nothing is wrong or ever has been wrong. America is and has always been great. For others, it constantly fails to live up to its potential. If for a moment we gloss over these complications and hypocrisies, we can come to understand this dominant Euro-American perspective on this holiday. Personally, I am no stranger to it. As a white, cisgendered, heterosexual man growing up in Virginia, I had that Euro-dominant view of Independence Day. A view I maintained, quite frankly, until I was in my mid-20s. I believed America stood alone as the greatest nation in the world. I believed that if people did nothing wrong, they wouldn't get in trouble, and those in prison were there because they deserved it. That everyone had equality under the law, the union was perfect, and democracy was infallible. The will of the people be done, and that is what is most important. Go America, love it or leave it, rah, rah. I had the whole thing. What a grand exercise and privilege my youth provided me. Of course, because my right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness was never in question, I simply assumed that since it was in writing, all people had the same privileges and experiences as me. Even today, I'm not immune to regressive patterns of behavior and thought. Just a couple of weeks ago, I had a fairly contentious discussion with someone I care very deeply about. In it, I approached a few topics from what I called pragmatic, and he called oppressive perspective. I ended up on the phone with a friend and mentor back east seeking advice and input. I was reminded of my place in the world and how it differs from the person with whom I had been speaking. I was reminded of the time recently where I took a trip cross-country, about the third time I've done that in 4 years. And I was reminded of the fact that almost all of my interaction with governments, institutions, and society in general have been positive in my life. My friend told me bluntly that as an African-American man, he could never fathom driving cross-country both ways with his family. And he suggested I put myself in the shoes of the person who wakes up every day with a different view of the world, one in which they feel threatened by people in power and viewed suspiciously by everyone else. One where the odds are stacked against them and systems created to privilege some actively oppress others. It was a powerful reality check. So much of America lives in a world where they are not followed around by security guards in stores. They are not pulled over without cause. When they are pulled over, they don't have to fear for their lives. We see the desire to elevate America as a country that wants to and believes that all people have rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that these rights cannot be taken from them. We can see the whitewashed values that many proclaim to espouse in spite of their actions and choices in elected officials, a view rooted in their individual experiences that are devoid of complex attitudes toward them, as well as empathy from them toward others. And when we take off our whitewashed glasses, we see in reality how often we fall short of those ideals. Whether the slave trade of the era the Declaration was signed, or the removal of rights to bodily autonomy and the overturning of Roe v. Wade by the Supreme Court, mass incarceration, environmental injustice, food insecurity, the struggle for voting rights, we have fallen short of our ideals. The struggles have been there in the past, and they remain today. Yet at its core, the desire to seek and declare independence and rights for individuals and the collective is a good thing, one that we continue to work to realize. For the Fugitive Slave Act was repealed. The Supreme Court cleared a path to remove the Remain in Mexico policy, and laws and policies requiring women to have a husband or father sign financial documents for them have been pushed by the wayside. We have seen those things undone, some a while ago and some just last week. Just as the duality of this country existed in its founding, a duality exists today. It's okay to recognize that great strides have been made since our founding, while at the same time acknowledging that great progress remains to be made moving forward. As the abolitionist minister Theodore Parker said, "I do not pretend to understand the moral universe. The arc is a long one, my eye reaches but little ways. I cannot calculate the curve and complete the figure by experience of sight. I can divine it by conscience, and from what I see, I am sure it bends toward justice." Now, this bending is not simply achieved. It is won by work, by organizing, by strengthening the communities in which we are part. Suffragist Jane Addams says it best, "In the unceasing ebb and flow of justice and oppression, we must dig channels as best we may, that at the propitious moment some swelling of the tide may occur, it may be conducted to the barren places of life. As UUs, we are not promised a perfect world, and we do not have, as a collective, a belief in the afterlife, a heaven, if you will. Rather, we are charged with creating heaven on earth, a society based on shared and common values in our lifetimes. We must bring to Independence Day a visible testimony to those values. Allow it to spark in us a commitment, a recommitment to bring those values to life for those it has all too often removed from the collective liberation of our nation. And let us be cautious in compromise, standing firm where we must, knowing how history has taught us the use of compromise to enshrine oppression and the status quo. Margaret Thatcher once said, "Consensus is the process of abandoning all beliefs, principles, values, and policies in search of something in which no one believes, but to which no one objects." What great cause would have been fought and won under the banner, "I stand for consensus"? Rather, we should stand firm in our convictions that every person is endowed with inherent worth and dignity, that we should respect the interdependent web of all existence, and that justice, equity, and compassion should be at the forefront of human relations. And we should do so with the goal of creating world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. Let our expression of patriotism be not based on empty words and American flag clothing, but in challenging the America to live up to its dream. Together, let us seek independence in striving for interdependence. Let us find our strength in the creation of beloved community. Let us bend that arc of the moral universe toward justice, and let us establish rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for all. We acknowledge defeats while celebrating progress. As we plant our flag on the side of justice, we build on the successes of the past in righting the wrongs of today. In all our struggles and setbacks, we retain the power of hope, the power of community, the power of faith. Perhaps former President Obama put it best in saying, "What greater expression of faith in the American experiment than this? What greater form of patriotism is there than the belief that America is not yet finished? That we are strong enough to be self-critical, that each successive generation can look upon our imperfections and decide that it is in our power to remake this nation more closely aligned with our highest ideals." May it be so.